Recording in progress.
Which we're not in EI City. Nope, I just want to make sure if Alvin Helms has something.
I'll have Deputy
President.
I think we are ready to go. Welcome everyone to our City Council study session for October 14th, 2024. Great to have you all here. I will turn it over to Administrator Allison Zelms to start us off.
Thank you, Council President, council members, members of the public. We are going to kick this off with a discussion about our citywide fleet evaluation. So I would want to welcome up Jessica Schuler, a management analyst who worked through this to talk about what some of the findings were and able to get some feedback from the city council about what feelings on it. So as she is getting ready, there she is.
Members of the council, council president, I'm excited to be speaking with all of you today. I will be sharing the findings of the citywide fleet evaluation. My name is Jessica Schuler. I'm a management analyst in the administration department. So jumping right in. The evaluation included several different components, including connecting with department heads, mechanics, fleet supervisors, and vehicle operators. The evaluation also included connecting with Dakota County. We utilized them as a guiding example of best practices. They were awarded #1 fleet in the nation by the National Association of Fleet Administrators. And so really was fortunate enough to sit down with them and connect with their fleet manager and tour the facility to understand their best practices. So jumping right into key findings. So departments are currently operating independently within their departments for fleet operations. Overwhelmingly, we heard that there's a lot of appreciation for staffing, that our mechanics are very skilled, they do a lot of great work, and our support teammates also do a great job of supporting fleet operations. That being said, there's a lot of work that can still be done to improve our technology, facilities, maintenance, and budget. So with technology, all of our departments are currently utilizing separate fleet management softwares to track work orders and fleet health. And so with that technology, with it being in separate systems, it really does limit our capabilities in reporting. In fact, we do some sustainability reporting that it's very difficult to get those numbers with all the systems being separate. In terms of facilities, currently facilities, it's a common theme that there's limited storage space for vehicles, equipments, and parts, which can negatively impact operations. For example, our police department is divided between 2 facilities, and so with that, there are inefficiencies with traveling between locations. Then in terms of maintenance, departments vary in the use of in-house services versus vendors, and there's a growing interest in utilizing more in-house capabilities. And then finally, budget, securing funding and managing budgets are ongoing challenges. For example, some teammates are tasked with ordering vehicles and managing fleet without the specialized knowledge that can guide decision-making. And that can cause challenges in ensuring the right choices are made for operational needs. So jumping right in, the recommendation from the fleet evaluation is to centralize our fleet operations, and that includes centralizing our team and facilities. So you can see here are all the different departments that are operating independently. And so a thing to note here is that with centralizing, our mechanics would continue supporting their originating department to help with continuity of operations. So for example, the fire mechanic would continue supporting the fire fleet, again, keeping that specialized knowledge. And then over time, you can do cross trainings to make sure that we're keeping that continuity of operations. A few notes here, RPU fleet is not included in this recommendation at this time. That being said, it should be considered for future centralization. Currently, they're on a different ERP system. And so with that project coming in 2026, or 2025, that there will be opportunity there to evaluate that in the future. And then the other note is that transit and parking, which you'll be hearing more about today, is still operated by a vendor. Our public works manager helps with those, but just noting that they're not in that centralization at this time either. So jumping right into the centralization components. So there are several different components with that centralization, including unified team, centralized facility and budget, unified fleet management software, and standardized processes. And so with that centralized team, the recommendation there is to have a fleet manager that can serve as a supervisor for the mechanics. They would be able to serve as a subject matter expert, supporting budget requests, and being an advocate for departments. Again, with that centralized team, there's more opportunity for cross trainings. And, if someone is taking time off or if there's a vacation, it really helps ensure that we have that continuity of operations. Finally, with the centralized facility, Public Works Transit Operations Center is the recommendation for having the centralized team. And with that location, there's room for growth, and it was built, in fact, with the vision of a centralized fleet in mind. For centralized software, the recommendation there is to utilize the new ERP system. And with that enterprise resource planning system being the preferred option, we will be submitting a contingent budget request that if for whatever reason it does not have fleet management capabilities, that we still have that centralized technology queued up. So this is a look at what that proposed structure would look like organizationally. So with that fleet manager being, again, the supervisor for those mechanics, you'd also have a parts clerk that would be able to support operations. And these are with current positions within our organization that we would restructure that team. With this recommendation, this is a preliminary recommendation. We understand that with that centralized technology, it will really help us gain further insights into what our staffing needs are. So this is the proposed implementation. So step one would be to establish the centralization or the transition team from all the different departments, making sure that we're communicating what the needs are for the centralization process. Next is to centralize mechanics, then consolidate the fleet management software, and then continually evaluate additional improvements. So for example, Dakota County shared that they have a vehicle replacement point system. So they have kind of a structure in place to help them understand which vehicles should be up next for replacement. They also shared some information about bulk purchasing practices. And again, looking to see how we can bring more work in-house where feasible. Another example too is that Dakota County shared that they look at the top 10% and bottom 10% of vehicle utilization to help them understand where vehicles maybe need to be reallocated to ensure that we're getting the most life out of them as possible. So additional considerations. So again, looking to bring more of that work in-house. So by bringing certain tasks in-house, we can reduce costs. For example, each vehicle outfitted for the police department requires approximately $600 in staff time for just commuting. And so moving that work in-house can lead to both direct and indirect cost savings. And that standardization is also beneficial for our vehicle operators, that in moving that work in-house, so we have more control for how the vehicles are set up. And also it helps with troubleshooting. So if all the vehicles are set up consistently, it helps us more easily diagnose and pinpoint where those issues are. In terms of staffing levels, again, that centralized technology across departments will give us a clearer understanding of our staffing needs. We can look to successful examples like RPU in Dakota County, where data-driven decisions have helped optimize staffing levels. So there are also industry formulas that we can look to calculate the number of work orders to mechanics to make sure that we're getting appropriate staffing levels. In terms of long-term planning, anticipating upcoming state and federal regulations is crucial for long-term planning. So for example, fleet electrification is an emerging requirement. Policies are incentivizing and may soon mandate fleet electrification. To support this shift, we need to carefully plan for the necessary charging infrastructure at our facilities. So centralizing operations will not only support this long-term forecasting, but will offer benefits of bulk purchasing power and efficient resource management. In terms of next steps for City Council, we'll be adding fleet centralization to our citywide action plan. And then there may be future budget requests for fleet management software and fleet positions. One additional note is that discussions are still ongoing at the staff level to foster consensus around alignment around centralization. And while centralization can be a tedious process, it offers significant benefits for our organization, including better data analysis, cost savings, and long-term planning. Ultimately, these enhancements will allow us to better serve our community. I'll turn it over to questions.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was a great presentation. Really, really great work, and an example of how we're continuing to work towards increasing efficiency and cost effectiveness in how we operate. So thank you. You answered a couple of my questions. One of them was around how are you building consensus in the departments to support the transition? It sounds like you're continuing that journey. And then you do talk about cost effectiveness and considering staffing. So will the new staff model just incorporate all the existing staff into a new org chart?
Correct.
Okay.
So thank you for the question, Council President. The recommendation at this time, since we do have the departments utilizing different software, once we centralize the software, we'll have much better data analysis capabilities. And in having that centralized system, like for example, our Parks and Rec department doesn't utilize any software. And so it really makes a lot of challenges for calculating what that appropriate
Okay.
staffing amount is.
Okay, so that will be assessed in the next year or so, or what's the timeline?
So with the implementation of the new ERP system or the fleet management software, that'll really be what helps us assess the appropriate staffing levels. So 2025 is when we'll be doing the ERP project. And sometime after that, once it's established, then we'll be able to do the staffing analysis.
All right, well, I think this sounds like a great approach. Are there other comments or questions? Councilmember Palmer?
Got a couple. You're not including RPU, and why aren't you using RPU?
So with RPU, I did connect with all the different departments. So they are operating in a facility that really meets their needs. All of their fleet operators, fleet managers, and mechanics are all operating within the same department. And so at this time, the recommendation is to focus on getting those other departments into the same centralized system, and then bringing in RPU at a later time. Just they're operating at a very good level right now, and with them being in one facility, I think in being in a different ERP system, it's just going to be a more phased approach.
Why wouldn't you just fold everybody else in RPU and just build the RPU? Because it sounds like they have the software and they have the facilities.
So their facilities are suited for their team currently. So it would not fit all of the citywide fleet.
But they're right next door. Right? RPU and Public Works is right next door physically.
So, I mean, there's still opportunities for improvement with that fleet technology. So with it being a part of the new ERP system, that would allow us to, we're going to be all moving to the same ERP system. And so just getting everyone operating in the same system will be a huge help in that. And just operating in different facilities, we don't want to hinder their operations while we're getting all the other departments.
Okay,
on
so
board.
in the photo you had there, you had truck 222, which I'm assuming is there for an oil change or tires. Are we still using outside vendors for those?
Can you?
Are we using outside vendors for typical vehicles, trucks and stuff that are just typical?
So departments vary in the use of what is in-house versus what we're using vendors for. So for example, Public Works, they pretty much do everything in-house except for the tires. So it really is on a department by department basis. I think fire department, pretty much their mechanic focuses more on doing the heavy equipment of the fire trucks, and a lot of the oil changes and things of that nature are sent out to outside vendors.
And so I guess the question is, we're looking at the future. Are we going to use outside vendors for we bid it out and they're doing these oil changes, they're doing these tires? Are we still going to do that, or are we bringing that in-house completely?
The recommendation is to move that in-house over time, that the focus would be getting all the teams centralized at first, and then starting to analyze what items we can move over in-house, that it's going to be very phased.
But wouldn't it be better to go see what the outside vendors would cost versus doing specialty? The fire department, I understand. The bookmobile, I understand. But when you're talking standard trucks and Public Works has lots of them, so does everybody else. Why not just see what it would cost to go to the outside vendors?
And that's absolutely an option. One of the things though too is that when our organization is doing oil changes, we're not just doing oil changes. We're also doing all sorts of vehicle checks that are, they're performing in-house. And again, you have the control in-house, and we can more easily track the health of our vehicles.
Okay, but in the past, when we've done outside vendors, they did the same thing and they would allow Public Works to do it. So I would want us to still do that. The other item in there is that you were talking about fleet and employment. I'm assuming the goal would be to have less employment and be more efficient instead of hiring people, but it sounds like in your presentation that you're planning on hiring more people.
So at this time, the recommendation is to just stick with the current staffing and just pulling them into a centralized team, and then assessing with that fleet management software what the appropriate staffing level is.
So the overall goal is to be more efficient.
Mhm. Correct. Yes. And with that centralization too, we do find we will hopefully see a lot of process improvements in reducing we have a lot of mechanics that are performing administrative tasks, and in moving them to a centralized team and having a dedicated fleet manager, we will be able to offload a lot of the work that the mechanics are doing as administrative work onto the fleet manager. So for example, the RPD mechanic, the lead mechanic, approximately 75% of the work that was reported to me is administrative work. And so moving that to a fleet manager is going to free up 75% of the time to work on vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
That was a really good response. All right. Councilmember Wall?
So some of my questions have been covered a little bit, but I might have a bit of a different twist on them. It would seem to me that if we are currently doing the job well enough for the city to function well, the only reason to do this would be cost savings. Would that be true?
There are also benefits with the technology centralization, as mentioned, that we're going to have better data analysis, and also like resource allocation too, that if each team is independently trying to plan for electric vehicles, we're better able to have just one fleet manager look at things citywide. So again, you get that bulk purchasing power. So again, cost savings there, but also there's efficiency too in having everyone in the same location able to share information, share knowledge, and there's a lot of benefits in increasing that skill set.
I'll go back to Mr. Palmer's point. Efficiency would seem to mean lower costs. That's what we're going for, but I'm not hearing agreement.
Yes, so part of it is reducing costs, that in getting everyone to a centralized team, again, as mentioned, moving more of that work in-house, that we're going to be able to, again, not use that outside vendors, save that $600 of staff time transporting vehicles back and forth, that there will be cost savings over time.
Maybe you could just talk a little bit about how Dakota saw cost savings or a concrete
Yeah, and maybe
example.
just one thing too. Yeah, I think there's a variety of things here. I mean, part of it is, just how we do the work better. And if you think about the amount of assets we have in fleet, we may or may not be, we think we have an opportunity to be a better steward of that asset with a centralized model. If you think about how you have to staff in a decentralized model, you have to hire people at the highest level of need that you have. Versus a decentralized model over time, we'll be able to evaluate for lower level needs, potentially hiring folks that can meet those needs better. So instead of having like a consistent high level of mechanics across the organization, you can potentially have someone that's willing and able to do that lower level work. And so over time, as these things do take time, but we'd have the opportunity, I think, to, better take care of the asset we have and save through some of those, position restructurings, long-term, not immediate. We have people we have to work with and navigate, but that's the thinking.
While I do appreciate that, again, that sounds like an opportunity for cost savings. And I don't hear any analysis that would say this should lead to a savings of $100,000 a year on our maintenance of vehicle costs.
Council President, Councilmember Wall, if I could just chime in. Apologies, I can't see you over there, but I just wanted to point out that part of that is because we don't have enough information based on the decentralized system to really be able to tell you that. I can tell you that in other communities that I've worked for, when we centralized the fleet management, we had a lot of information to be able to make other future decisions. for example, there may be a part of the work that would make a lot of sense to contract out to a private vendor. But you don't know what all of those savings are if we have multiple different ways that we're operating the fleet. We have a significant number of surplus vehicles that are still in our fleet that we haven't been reserving for example, to replace. Do we really need all of those? It's hard to even pull together a report that says this vehicle has gotten 100 miles a year on it or X number of hours, or to be able to pull consistently across the organization whether or not we're overspending on maintenance when vehicle maybe shouldn't continue to be maintained, maybe it should just be replaced. Because there are those situations where a vehicle maybe has already gotten double the amount of maintenance than what the original cost was. I've seen that in other places. I can't tell you that here. But yes, the absolute goal is to mitigate cost and to really have that happen and know what those savings are. We really would need to have all of the departments working on a similar, even a system at all, because we have one that doesn't even have like a system for tracking other than, I'm assuming they use a spreadsheet, but it's not the data wouldn't be consistent across it, so you couldn't even show like apples to apples across the system to be able to say, we think that if we do this policy change in how we operate the fleet, that we would be able to have a savings of X amount over time, or even standardizing, for example, the types of vehicles that we purchase. Knowing that X type of vehicle could be used in these 3 different departments in these 4 different ways as they sort of shuffle through the system. So I would say absolutely that's the goal. And we may learn from that we don't have that enough data yet, that we either need to change the structure or do some things in-house, some things with the vendor, et cetera. But right now we don't have great data to be able to show that, whether we would save $100,000 or 50, or it would be neutral, but we would at least know we are managing the fleet in a way that is optimized for cost.
That leads to a second point, and you've referred to it, Administrator Zelms. I would presume that part of the analysis would be, we have cars that are parked all the time. I mean, how many do we own? 100 SUVs? I don't know how many we own. Will we expect to find that we can buy fewer vehicles by fleet management in this way?
As mentioned with the model that Dakota County shared, that they have the system to look at the top 10% and bottom 10%, and that will help us understand where there are vehicles that were maybe not needed that we can dispose of.
How big is Dakota County's fleet compared to our fleet?
I would have to check my resources. I do have a binder of information that I can absolutely look that up and reach out to my contact. But they do house a lot of vehicles, including the entire Dakota Sheriff Department.
Have we checked with more than one peer in this?
Not at this time, but happy to continue checking with more peers as well.
Have we checked with anybody who has centralized and has been unhappy with that decision?
Not at this time. I have not. Dakota County was the contact, again, being awarded #1 fleet in the nation, and their resources that they provided to us were very thorough and detailed.
Would this require building a new building for a centralized fleet?
No, as mentioned in the presentation, that the recommendation would be to utilize the Public Works Transit Operations Center in existing building.
I'm sorry, I missed that. I think that's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Keen?
Yeah, thanks. Just making sure, I mean, I've seen a lot of different things we call fleet issues. We went through the whole police ordinance through enterprise. But when I watch these couple of charts, I think of it as maintenance and operations and not ordering. Does the fleet management include the ordering or sourcing of vehicles, or just the maintenance?
Correct. It would be both maintenance and vehicle ordering, that the fleet manager would help support that. There would be a lot of communication between departments. Within the actual report itself, it does include a fleet committee where you would establish those connections for departments to share their vehicle needs.
Okay, again, the reason I bring it up is that I think it is a different sort of thing. When I remember with the police one, there seems to be a lot of demand for control closer to how the ordering and what the vehicles are. So again, just trying to clarify. And again, my questions had to do with this whole efficiency This really is more or less getting our arms around being able to manage something, that type of efficiency. This isn't something that we're trying to either spend to build resources, new resources, or we're willing to book reductions based on what we mean by efficiency here.
So I think, can you rephrase the question, please?
Well, again, following up, I was trying to say, when I see efficient, I was saying, are you booking savings into the future? And I think I've heard the discussion here is that this is more the idea, the efficient concept of getting our arms around it and managing it and knowing what we have and what we don't have. That's more of what we mean by efficiency here, not cost savings. And there isn't any new spending this is gonna come with a council initiated action or a request for council action in the next couple weeks to hire people to run this. There's neither of those happening.
Correct. And with the, I mean, there are also going to be benefits too, that when I connected with Dakota County, that they shared that with filing vehicle tabs, that they found that different departments were filing it different ways, that one department hadn't been filing it as a government agency, and so they were paying more for those vehicle tabs. And so moving all of those things and standardizing, there's going to be a lot of best practices and knowledge sharing that will increase efficiency as well.
Okay. Whenever I hear centralization though, too, I also think of like, okay, I'll put aside 2% of my budget for fleet, but I'll order a lot more than that and let them figure it out. Is there a business control? So it's that the fire department carries in their budget the expenses they need for fleet and fleet management?
Thank you for the question. The recommendation is to centralize the fleet budget entirely. So taking that portion of the department budgets and moving it to a centralized fleet budget.
That answer surprises me. That means that the police are not, as far as what their expenses are, don't no longer include the amount of fleet they order? That doesn't seem right.
Your Honor. So I think there's two things. There's purchasing and operations. So purchasing, we already allocate costs back to departments. That continue to be the case. And then they pay, annually for the cost for, in essence, to depreciate the equipment. So there's a bit of an equipment revolving fund our fleet revolving fund that handles that. We would evaluate, on the maintenance side, whether there's a chargeback to the department, but the expenses are incurred within a fund. I mean, so it becomes sort of an internal service fund concept. But we'd spend more time with that. But generally speaking, within our financial reporting, we need to make sure that those costs are reflected in the operations and service they're providing. So it would show up in their expenses, but they may initially it'd be like a chargeback potentially.
Okay.
Is what we're.
Yeah, I just want to make sure with centralization, you don't end up with this, that it's not a department head's concern anymore. It's somebody else's concern. Because fleet it's a major expense at our city level, and we don't want to have it just being like a centralized slush fund of whoever, we're going to put aside this much money and everyone compete for it. So I want to be careful with that. I want to just do a quick follow-up on the RPU question. I think it is good that over time we look at including that, but the level of accuracy we need to make sure we can cost share those things correctly, because utilities, the cost accounting is very important, that we don't end up starting to either pull money into the city from the utility or the other way of just start funding things for the utility that aren't covered under the utility bills. It's important that we keep those things separate. Generally speaking, I'm supportive of this idea of getting more data control. But again, this is when I look, especially something like the police, the community development, it's a smaller part of their operation, but something like police and when you start talking about RPU and talk about fleet management, it's a major cost structure. So just this idea of knowing what the facts are important, but I also want to make sure that they reflect back to the heads and are part of functional area budgets and not just support across the city.
Thank you.
I have one more quick question before I hand it off to Councilmember Dennis. Will you be looking at setting metrics for how the work is going to make sure that the department's needs are continuing to be met as it is more centralized?
Thank you for the question, Council President. Within the outline of the steps for centralization, that step one being to set up that centralized fleet team, and in centralizing that, or getting that fleet committee set up from having stakeholders from each department. Part of that process is setting key performance metrics to make sure that everything is
I did
operating.
listen and I did read it, but you know,
Mhm.
good to be reassured that that's there. Go ahead, Councilmember Dennis.
Thank you. So I totally see a lot of benefit, of course, when you collaborate and bring things, resources together. So I think that is great. The council prior to many of us who are on council had done the image unification where we had all the departments had different logos and then they all came together. And that was like a one-time cost, kind of a one-time big cost of switching everything over. Why wasn't this done at that same time? I heard a little bit of it, but like, wouldn't have that been a better time to do a centralization when we were centralizing all the image and all the optics of our city into a unified logo? Why is it now all of a sudden going through this huge change that instead of when it was more obvious of a time?
Council President, Councilmember Dennis, I don't think that Jessica Schuler was working on that, so I can see where having the centralized logo would be sort of a similar concept. This is really about how the fleet operates, so it's really not a relationship between how we operationalize fleet in a centralized sort of way, and the logos. So it would be, yes, more centralized. And so, yes, the concept of having one type of logo applies in that way. However, the actual review of the fleet and how the services are being provided and what the costs are and what type of data we have is very different than the scope of work of the logo and the design work.
Okay, well, I agree with, or many of the questions I've had were touched on today, but with Councilmember Wall talking about comparing this to others, I think that is so essential, and I feel very uncomfortable doing a huge change like this when it hasn't even been compared. Okay, so correct me, please, if I'm wrong. Compared to other cities with our size and budget, is that correct? Like, we haven't gone around the US and say, okay, we find another city with 124, 150,000 people, like give some, growth room and say, have they done this? Because I feel having, we don't want to reinvent the wheel and say, well, we're just going to take it from one county. So just to reiterate, there has not been any comparisons to other cities of our budget and size in the nation.
The evaluation just included the connect with Dakota County.
Well, I think instead of trying to do a huge change like this, where I think it could cause a lot of ripple effects, it would be good to have a comparison to other communities. And then I know vague is safe. A lot of people like to be very vague in their answers. But with the mention about future budget requests, could you be more specific of what future costs this is going to cause taxpayers?
So at this time, the recommendation just includes centralizing the team and then over time analyzing what additional improvements that we can implement. And so with that, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis of analyzing, like we can look at like implementing that point system or looking at what work is done in-house versus out of house, that it'll be done at kind of a case-by-case basis as we get established as a centralized fleet team. So really step one is getting that centralized team, getting the centralized facilities, and then over time, looking at those kind of mini projects to create cost savings.
Your Honor. And maybe just the one specific request that, again, we'll have to evaluate because we don't have a specific answer tonight, but, is the software. And, there's a couple things that we just don't know about, whether when we go through the ERP software selection for that project, which was replacing all of our finance systems, et cetera, that has been approved in previous budgets, that may or may not have a good fleet integration to it. But right now, we have probably 4 or 5, different softwares for fleet across the city. A different one in police, different one in fire. Some people are doing it sort of manually. One that's used in public works. So we may be able to see some savings with how we don't do it in other systems, but there likely is some investment. And we would do more analysis too to determine like what we might save in that process as well. So that's a forthcoming budget request. We don't have the exact number, but that's something you might expect to see in 26.
Okay, I feel uncomfortable with, I mean, we're not doing huge things right this moment in the study session, but feel uncomfortable not having exact numbers. I feel once you invest and change everything, then it's going to be like hard to change back. And so we will almost, future councils might have their hands tied and like, well, we better just invest that extra, 100,000, 200,000, whatever it is, in the future, because we've already made the changes now. And another thing I just worry about is, like I do for a lot of minority groups in our world, is that you have to protect to make sure that maybe the departments without the biggest budget also have protection. I think when you have separate, of course, there's a lot of the issues that you have mentioned, but it also has, well, that's our budget. That's, we're going to take more care of this because it's coming out directly out of our police budget or, community development or public works budget. So when you have it more in a pot, I feel like, and I'm going to use the library because just, comparison, the library compared to public safety, like the police or fire. I just want to make sure that their vehicles aren't, like that they would have had, wouldn't be used or just kind of melded into, because it's easy to justify. We need an extra vehicle to travel to a firefighter convention, right? We'll just take the one that library usually, and then the library will be short suited that vehicle. So I just worry a little bit about the checks and balances, making sure that certain departments don't get like that we know where money is being used, what, people take care of things as if they were really the bottom line of their department. And so is there anything about preventing that from happening to make sure that like departments don't get swallowed up if, let's say that the library, doesn't use their, I'm making this up, I don't know, but doesn't use their vehicle as frequently as another, that they don't just act like somehow lose that access or that they're not taken over.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any guarantee of that to make sure that they have vehicles?
And so with that process of centralizing, again, establishing that team of department heads and the fleet manager, there'll be opportunity for each department to communicate their needs. And so absolutely. And one of the benefits too of having that fleet manager is that they can serve as an advocate for each of those departments and develop a system that ensures that these departments don't lose those necessary assets. But one of the things that when I connected with the library, that they were very excited about the fact of having a fleet manager that can help articulate their needs and help them with the specifications. That again, that's another instance of how this work has kind of ended up with people that don't necessarily have that fleet expertise. And so by having that fleet manager, they get that built-in subject matter expert.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, the checks and balances, that people know exactly where every single taxpayer dollar is going into what department. And so thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, thank you so much. Thank you. Next, we have our transit operations study from our transit and parking services team. Do you want to start us off or should I invite Ms. Zhang up?
I think it would be perfectly fine to invite Ms. Zhang up and she can introduce those who are with her.
Welcome.
So good afternoon, Council President, Council members, Yeshong, Transit and Parking Director. I also have here Jill Cahoon from AECom who will be presenting the evaluation. The transit operations study is being brought forward to you for discussion. We have been undergoing evaluation of the different scenarios of providing transit operations. Before I hand it off to Jill, I'll go into the background and purpose of why we're doing this at this time. So as you are aware, our contracted operator, TransDev, their contract expires at the end of 2026. Alongside with that is the Link BRT project scheduled to be opening also towards the end of 2026. And you'll hear more about the Link BRT update after this presentation. So it's all kind of merging at the same time. Prior to this, or recently this last year, we've been working with Federal Transit Administration's project management oversight consultant on the risk readiness review for the bus rapid transit. And through that process, the report what made recommendation from FTA that we make a decision on how we proceed by November of this year. So that was the recommendation. And that's the reason why we're bringing it to you now. So so earlier this year, then AECOM was hired by Minn to help us out with this study to evaluate the different scenarios. As you all know, just going over the operation services, I mean, we currently run our fixed route, our ZIPS paratransit, and then we recently piloted our microtransit pilot in the southeast area. And so we are trying new services. Obviously, bus rapid transit is also coming, so we're preparing for that. So with Transdev's contract expiring at the end of 2026, we need to prepare for it. The reason why FTA has required us to make this decision on how we're going to move forward is that the contract has no more extension options on it. And so what are we going to do after that? How are we going to transition? It takes time. And so any decision that we make now, we're going to need to do the planning, the transitioning, the implementation of whatever that plan is. And so hence the 2 years ahead in order to move forward. Transdev currently provides the drivers, the supervisors, the dispatchers, the general manager to oversee that, and then the maintenance manager. So you just heard from Jessica on our centralization of the fleet. And so we'll talk about that later too. They also provide the software for paratransit. We were also able to, when we piloted the microtransit, work with Transdev in having them provide the software for microtransit. And they were also, they made available or they hired additional drivers and dispatchers for microtransit. So we were able to implement that system or that pilot quickly. They also bring a few of their vehicles into into the picture here. They provide their own vehicles for their supervisors and their managers. And then as paratransit was increasing in ridership, we needed additional vehicles. And so they were able to provide some vehicles for that additional ridership. The microtransit vehicles are owned by the city. We received a carbon reduction program grant for the vehicles. And so those are city owned, and all the other vehicles are owned by the city. So our fixed routes, our big buses, our paratransit buses, and then also the 4 electric vehicles that we just recently purchased in the last couple of years are owned by the city. And so that's kind of the lay of the land of the current Transdev contract. As mentioned, AECOM, Jill Cahoon, we've been working together all summer long on the evaluation to look at the different scenarios, and I will turn it over to Jill to.
Hello, thank you for having me, Council President, Council members. So we'll walk through the potential pathways for service provision across 4 scenarios. The first 2 scenarios involve the vendor operation of the service. And the first scenario includes is kind of the status quo, how things are operated now, with Transdev being the primary vendor, and then they have a few sub-vendors to operate the paratransit service. The second scenario would look at multiple vendors to operate the service, either by mode, splitting it out for fixed route, paratransit, bus rapid transit, or some combination of those. The third scenario, I went too fast. Touch it lightly. Yeah, the third scenario, I'll go by memory. Actually, no, I have it on paper. The third scenario looks at bringing in partial operations in-house, and that includes bringing in, specifically for partial operations, specifically bringing in the maintenance in-house with the fleet centralization process. So Department of Public Works would centralize all fleet maintenance. And then scenario 4 looks at bringing all operations of all transit services in-house. Alrighty, so we will walk through each of the scenarios one by one. And what we're looking at when we're talking about the scenarios is the actual cost to operate each scenario. So you'll see the cost in a range of options, and that's the operating cost per year. Then we'll also be looking at some more qualitative measures of complexity, liability, control, staffing requirements, and uncertainty. And those are expressed in a range of 1 to 5, where 1 is a higher level of effort, 3 is very similar to what it is now, and 5 is a lower level of effort. So we'll look at each of those different components for each of the scenarios, and they'll each be given a number. So starting with the first scenario, we're looking at a $23.1 to $24.5 million average annual operating cost. And scenario 1, again, is the single vendor operations, very similar to now. So the overall score, looking at each of the characteristics that are explicit, explaining and comparing the different options, you'll see that all of them received a 3 because this is exactly like the status quo. The scenario, first scenario is again the status quo, and there are some things that that work very well with that, with access to vendor resources. There's the opportunity to update the next procurement with lessons learned based on previous procurements, and there's ability to add staff and expertise quickly as needed. As mentioned with the microtransit pilot, for example, that was able to be brought on quickly. Some challenges have to do with communication and collaboration, have to do with every time there's a procurement. Procurement is a challenging and long process. There's a lot of decisions to be made, so it involves a procurement process. There's also some inconsistencies between the city and the vendors' management practices and policies, and there's contract limitations as well. So those are kind of the pros and cons for moving forward with the status quo. The second scenario is the same as the first, except that it's looking at multiple vendor contracts. So you can see that actually makes things both more expensive because it takes more work to collaborate with multiple vendors. It's a more complex procurement process because you're looking at multiple contracts and then you're managing multiple contracts. So you can see the overall score for the scenario 2 is 2.2, so less than the 3 of the scenario number 1, which is the status quo. So more uncertainty, more complex. That's how it would look depending on the number of multiple contracts that could come out of that process. Again, similar opportunities. It's similar to the status quo. It does still provide you with access to vendor resources. Similarly, lessons learned from the current and past procurement processes, and the ability to react somewhat quickly. Again, the challenges are the same as the first as well, with the mismatch on policies and responsibilities. There's also complexity, quite a lot of complexity added with managing multiple contracts and going through a more complicated multiple part procurement process. So then moving into scenario 3, which brings maintenance in-house. That's the partial in-house scenario. That is about the same cost range as scenario 1, and it has a score of a 2.8. So there are some benefits and some challenges associated with bringing maintenance in-house, brings it to a 2.8 score. So it provides the opportunity to participate in the centralization of fleet. It gives the city more control over maintenance practices. The city, of course, does own all of the vehicles. So having a closer handle on maintenance and maintenance practices. Also helps with proactive decision-making and understanding how the vehicles are maintained and to what level. Also some streamlining in procurement of parts and vehicles as well, and ability to align so that the ability to manage costs is improved in this scenario for fleet maintenance, which of course a major component of operating a fleet. And an alternative on this one is that that the procurement could have maintenance as an option when procuring for a service vendor, and then look and see, compare it. The challenges are, there's the same challenges as whenever you'll still have a procurement process that you'll need to go through for the service vendor. And then the existing challenges remain, but again, with the same opportunities to make improvements based on lesson learned from previous procurements. And there, of course, would require some additional maintenance staff in order to be able to maintain the fleet in-house. There are, it's a large fleet, so there would need to be some expansion. And then finally, bringing the entirety of the service operations in-house. That is the most expensive option and receives an overall score of 2. Bringing operations in-house would involve, go to the next, would involve hiring 140 new employees. It would require a long transition timeframe to hire that many folks. It would require expansion of human resources and other support roles. We also would be looking at additional technology procurement and an increase in liability. Some opportunities, of course, on the other hand, are to improve the passenger and operator experience, gives the city more control over the service, has more ear to the ground opportunities if operated in-house, and gives the city a little bit more control over cost certainty. So with those pros and cons, we'll look at the summary. So when we're looking at all of the scenarios together, and this second column here with the operations cost, that one also includes capital costs. So you get an idea of the startup costs associated with any of the scenarios with regard to procurement of software and vehicles and other pieces. So you can see the summary at this high level for all 4 of the scenarios. So at this point, I will turn it back over.
All right, so Jill went over the 4 different scenarios. As you can see, there are opportunities and challenges for each one. It's not a clear winner. I was told not to bury the lead, so I'll just get to it. The recommendation is go to scenario 3, which is bring maintenance in-house. There are some advantages to that. They're listed on this, but it's comparable cost to scenario 2 and 4. It's a lower cost. Scenario 2 is the multiple vendors, and then scenario 4 is the bring everything in-house. The other thing too is if we continue with a contracted operations model, we will retain that vendor resource. For example, the microtransit pilot, we were able to pivot on that quickly through the vendor being able to support that through the software. Same thing with BRT with in 2026 here, getting ready for that. And so there's that pro on that. And then also, as you've all heard with Jessica and the centralization of the fleet, I mean, there's an opportunity there that as we transition citywide into a centralized fleet, that transit could be part of that in some form. A couple things also that is occurring right now is there are staffing changes. TransDev's maintenance manager just recently retired. And so our city public works fleet manager has been working very closely with TransDev's maintenance team on oversight and working through that transition with them. So he's working more closely with them. Also currently with the EV, the 4 EVs that we had, one thing that occurred was the training occurred on the TransDev mechanics, but not the city mechanics. And so we just recently had a citywide mechanics EV training. So we brought the vendor back in and did some training. And so now there's cross training across the board there. So there's that opportunity where if we brought the maintenance in-house, that there would be that overlap and that expertise does not walk out the door. And then just as Jill said, the improvements and the cost management of the maintenance. Right now, we own the vehicles, we pay for the parts. In fact, if you have visited our facility out at PWTOC, we've got our maintenance bay for transit and then the public works on the other side. But in between is the parts. And the city orders the parts, it's there. When transit needs it, we go and get it and it gets charged to transit. So there's already some form of like maintenance overlap there with the city overseeing that. And so it makes sense that if we were to look at how to move forward, transitioning maintenance in-house would be like I don't want to say easier, but like makes more sense because we already are doing some parts of that. Also, as we procure, we can always, we can do an alternative for maintenance. And if we were unable to transition for some reason, we would still have that option as part of that procurement. Another thing about this too is with the fleet, we are with BRT coming on board with 12 electric vehicles. That's a huge undertaking. And to keep that in-house is going to be a major benefit to us to continue that in-house versus contracting it out. So next steps, I'll open it up for questions and comments, but as just wrapping it up to like earlier from what I said before, this is a requirement from FTA for us to make that decision in order to start that planning and that implementation process of whatever it is that we choose. And so we will be coming back on the November 4th council meeting date for reports and recommendation, and so that we can move forward and get that approval from FTA. So I'll open up for questions.
All right, thank you so much. Where do we want to start? Councilmember Keen?
Thank you. Again, I'm on page 39 on your charts, or it's in the packet. I just wanted to make sure I understand those cost numbers that we're showing, 10-year operations cost. One more back, I think. The 10-year operations cost, is this the cost of the 4 different systems we're talking about running? Like this is divided by 10, that's this cost to the city, or is that the cost? And then that's gross cost less grants and other supports we get?
Yep, good question, Councilmember King. This is the total operations cost. So it's the cost to operate the BRT, the fixed route, paratransit.
Okay.
It does not include microtransit, but it would be what our cost is.
Not
So-
depreciation or anything like that, though?
No, and there's no capital costs included in this.
Okay, just that, again, that's the point you're making, is operations.
Right.
When you start talking about running these, there's one department called public transportation. How do we keep the 4 different systems separate underneath there? How do we make sure that we know that bus rapid transit costs this much to run a year?
Yep, so we have business codes. Currently, right now, we have a business code for our fixed route and a business code for our paratransit. We already have set up a BRT business code. And so those expenses are kept in that business account.
Okay, and that's probably easier on the capital and how that is spent out, but on operations, we have a lot of confidence in that?
Repeat that.
I'm
question.
just making sure when I think of like, we have the BRT buses are clearly separate from our fixed route buses or from micro. They're very separate. I want to get a comfort feeling that our operations is similar. We always know that our operations expenses are very clearly to one of the four services and not 30% to one and 70% to another. There's rarely charges like that.
Correct. So when we have expenses, it is charged to, so for example, the diesel is charged to the correct account. And so it is sectored that way. Same thing with revenue coming in. As we receive revenue from paratransit, it goes into the paratransit line item. And then same thing with the fixed route. So it is separate. Mhm.
Okay, good. I just want to get comfortable with that. The next one, just when we talk about bringing something in, there's always this old concept of, do you send it out and have someone else do it for you that has the expertise, and you probably have a little extra cost versus do you bring it in? Is this really coming in at just a public transportation level, or is it coming in at a public works level? Or is it coming in more at a city level that we want to have these skills within the city and we have enough work to make sure they stay busy? Or is it really just that these are skills we're just bringing in for public transportation work and that's what they'll do, nothing else?
Yep, so you're talking about the mechanics if we were
Yes.
bringing it in-house. Right, so we would need to hire additional mechanics. And then we would have that central, if it was to move towards centralization, have that fleet manager also managing that. We are, because transit is funded by state and federal funds and we are in enterprise funds, we do need to make sure that that work is to transit, charged to
Okay.
transit, and it's contained in there. Currently, right now, we do have other businesses, or not other business, departments do work for transit, and so we labor allocate when they do that. So for example, when streets go out or traffic goes out and puts up a sign for us, if there's any labor allocation required to that, that gets charged back to transit. So it would be similar to the mechanics. We would have assigned like specific number of mechanics required for the vehicles, and their time would be charged to us. But if we needed additional and there was more work needed, then their time would be charged to transit.
Okay, and just understanding the constant help we have here, I think I understand it to be, this is MnDOT coming in, helping the city of Rochester decide what they're going to do, and then taking that back to the federal transportation. It is I heard MnDOT vendor, but I think they're a vendor to us, but it's MnDOT is helping us with that?
Right, it's MnDOT's consultant. We had the opportunity for MnDOT to provide that service to us. It's a consultant hired by MnDOT to help in this evaluation as a third party unbiased review. The Federal Transit Administration is not, they're not going to dictate what we decide, but we do need to report back to FTA.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Palmer.
So we have a contract with a company right now, and I'm confused by a statement you made that they have a retirement, but our public works people now are helping them. If they have a contract to supply this person, why are we helping?
Yep, so good question. They did hire a fleet maintenance manager on their end. He is new to the agency, TransDev. And so with that transitioning of that, our city fleet manager has been overseeing and helping out with that transition. There's a lot of what is happening is the electric vehicles are new to everybody. And so our fleet manager has been working with the vendor and been that direct connect with them in regards to getting the technician out here, getting the parts ordered.
So are you back charging them for this then? Are we getting are we back charging them for this stuff?
There is no back charge.
Well,
That's
if we're using our employees to do something that we have a contract for, we should be getting reimbursed for that. And you're telling me we're not?
well, we're not getting charged
You have a public works person that the city of Rochester's hired.
Mhm.
We have a contract and they're supposed to be doing something under the contract. Our person is doing their job. Shouldn't we be reimbursed for that?
We could look into that. I think that
well-
there is some requirement for us to see them succeed as much as we do. It's our vehicle. We want to make sure it's maintained. Just as we have our own city's staff, where we're doing service changes right now for starting on November 4th. We need to support them as much as they support us in these changes. And so as they're transitioning over, I think it makes sense for us to look at this. And if that availability is there for us to see that through, I think it's advantageous to us to help them.
Well, it'd be great if I had a contract with you and I have you doing the work for me.
So if I-
So that doesn't make any sense to me.
If I can chime in, again, I don't think, I don't think it's fair to say that we're doing their work for them. I think the
Well, that's
point
what
here,
she's saying.
I think the point here is that we are, the two are working together as we are keeping track of our asset, which we own the bus. And so we certainly want our maintenance team to understand what's going on with our asset. So certainly our team is helping and we are coordinating, but I think it would be a stretch to say that we are doing a billable service for their group.
But they are supposed to be maintaining our bus.
Yep, and they are maintaining the bus in coordination with our team.
So in the contract, it says we coordinate with them.
I don't think it says that in the contract, but I also think it's in our best interest to make sure we're on the same page of how our asset is being maintained.
Well, I guess to me, the best interest is for us to take the contract and do it by the letter of the contract, but obviously I'm losing on that battle. Who runs zips for us?
It's contracted with TransDev. They have subcontractor to operate it
Okay.
as the drivers.
I guess my opinion is that scenario one is the only scenario that makes sense to me. We should have a set of standards, but going outside for maintenance and hiring more maintenance people and having more maintenance stuff, to me, doesn't make any sense. I think from an outside perspective, if I have electric buses, that other companies would be able to go to other cities and see how they do it and what they do best. And if you just do it all in-house, you're kind of just eliminating yourself to what you kind of know or trial and error. So I'm for scenario one. I really don't support any of the other ones. Thank you.
Your Honor. I think one of the options that you have here is, as you look at the potential hybrid scenario, is you could bid it out as scenario one, but then have the maintenance of the vehicles as an alternate. And then you'd actually understand the direct pricing versus our direct cost of service provision. And I think it is important what he is saying is that we have these contracts, but we also have to, we're the owner at the end of the day. And you've seen over time where we don't have the right long-term perspective on the asset, that the right stewardship doesn't take place. And so you have to identify where you have gaps. And in some cases, when we're going to own something like a bus, that's, significant investment. You do want to make sure that it's being maintained instead of having a 3 or 5 year outlook on the asset. So I think one way to do it is, obviously you can bid it as a full service proposal, but having an alternate that carves that portion out, and then we can better assess it as you go through the process.
But can't you also do that by having a contract that's written that this is what we're doing from a long-term perspective?
You certainly can, but I think like what you don't see is the day-to-day on these things. And the day-to-day would say is, yes, maintain the asset so it runs, it's on the road, it's serviceable, uptime percentage is blank. But you don't know, like, do they buy new parts or do they evaluate used options? Or that's just a small example, but I do think there are just things in the day-to-day situation where it's like, yes, is it running? But did we have it set up in a way that is best for the 15, 20-year life of the asset? In any of these contracted relationships, we see that where you disconnect from that long-term view. Sometimes you get short-term thinking.
But we've already been told that we have the parts is ours and we give them the parts. We buy the parts. We have it, part storage.
Yeah, I'll defer back to Ian on that part of it.
Yes, that's correct. But the way buses are also the order of when they get maintained and what gets maintained or replaced. Like, do we replace this engine because we still have the useful life on it is another couple, 3 years? Do we, those kind of decisions needs to be internal because it's our investment. We want to make sure that the maintenance that's done onto those buses are the right fix for it at the right time. Some of that sometimes get lost in that coordination because they are, and that's where our our city fleet manager has been pulled in to review that. We're disposing vehicles right now and we're doing that. So we want to make sure that we're not putting bus number XYZ out of service, but then maintenance is trying to fix it. And so that streamlining and the efficiency gets lost sometimes when that happens. And so we don't want them to fix something that we're ready to dispose. And that's just a gap there.
Well, I would assume you could talk to each other at what you're gonna dispose of, but I also look at, if I'm operating a bus and I have a maintenance bunch that's a different bunch, I'm not coordinating. And so if I need to have a bus on the road and the maintenance guy says, well, it's not ready, now we're not serving same people. And if it's under one control, I have one person to say, why isn't this bus on the road? So, and adding more employees for the city of Rochester for maintenance, we just had a discussion that we we're probably going to have less maintenance employees. So I don't see adding more maintenance employees makes any sense to me, so.
And I probably forgot to mention that, so the work orders, and the, vehicle asset list is also, under our purview, so we keep that. So when you talk about like down buses, we keep that information in our system, so that's all contained, by the city.
I'm going to hand it over to Councilmember Wall, but I'm so sorry. I'm suddenly not feeling well at all. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Councilmember Kirkpatrick to lead. I'm so sorry to leave in the middle of the meeting.
No, I'm sorry too. Hope you feel better.
Thank you. You're on.
The only difference between scenario 1 and 3 is that we would omit maintenance with an outside vendor. Would
Correct.
that be a simple way to put it?
Yes. Mhm.
And part of the advantages is to increase control and improve cost management.
That's correct.
And yet it's going to cost us an extra $200,000 a year or so based on estimates. How does that improve our cost management if we're increasing costs by taking on the maintenance ourselves?
So there is some additional capital, I don't know if it's considered capital, but one-time cost to bring them in-house. As an ongoing, there are things such as like the tool reimbursement. Right now, that's covered by TransDev, the contractor, not us. And so those are things where we would have then to add on to our operational expenses.
But it still does look like it would cost us an extra $200,000 a year or so.
Correct.
Based on estimates.
And I don't, Jill, I'm gonna lean on you. As far as like number of mechanics, I believe we are looking at additional mechanics if we bring it in-house. And then you're gonna ask why. So,
Yes, so we'd be looking at 5 additional mechanics, and some of that has to do, and the other capital cost is software. So it'd be both the tool reimbursement and the software. So those would be additional capital costs. But from the mechanics perspective, they were looking at 5 additional mechanics to work on the heavy duty vehicles. They're highly specialized buses in particular. So that's where we'd be looking at the increase.
And yet an increase. I presume that this would go out to a bidding contract for vendors at some point in 2025 and starting in 26?
correct. So in the next steps, in 2025, what we would do is with a procurement, we would go out for procurement, request for proposal. Most of you were probably not here when we did the previous RFP for this, but we had hired a third-party consultant to do the procurement for us, for the city. And so we would look towards a similar structure in hiring a third party to put that RFP together and do the evaluation and the solicitation of that. So that's going to take some time. And then just putting the RFP, looking at the lessons learned that we've had through the years of this current contract and updating our specifications or requirements, that will take some time. So I can see that in 2025, we would start working on that RFP process and then posting it and going through the solicitations. And in early 2026, we would be at a point where we can start that transition, potentially awarding the contract and then starting that transition so that there is no gap when the current contract ends.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kane.
Again, I just want to follow up on this. I spoke earlier and I wanted to make sure I understood that idea of like, we're bringing it, the difference between scenario 1 and 3 is, trying to do this in-house. I think you've tried to make this point that one of the things going on with bus rapid transit is this idea of like a major growth in the amount of assets we're managing coming into 2026 and the risk we have there with all this now, this electric technology, this newer stuff, are we going to maintain it correctly and extend it? And my sense was that was sort of the driving force at a staff level to say, we would be better served having control of this. This isn't just a pure cost thing. I think that's what the consultants were doing with their percentage amount, the amount of control you have, the amount of risk you have, that kind of stuff. So I would support with the idea at this point that we do want to maintain that level of control based on the idea of these newer kind of assets coming in. These are a major expense and we're going to be trying to depreciate them, I think, at like about a 15-year level. So I support the idea of trying to say we want to have better control of how we do this maintenance. And again, I think we're going to make at least a 5-year decision, but over time, if it turns out to be something that we can't take full use of that, I think that's where you try to then have another group do it who can do other things other than that and, hire specialists. But at this point, I would support the scenario 3.
Thank you, Mr. Keen. Ms. Dennis. Thank you. So a couple questions. I guess maybe I'm just confused. Are we at with capacity to be hiring more staff, is there, that's a huge expense. So, I don't know, maybe I'm just not following with all the questions here. How many staff would you think would have to be hired for this?
For bringing mechanics in-house?
For this,
Yep, so
Area.
five additional mechanics.
5 additional mechanics? Okay. Okay, and then I guess my question is, when you came up with this, there's probably a lot of numbers and data. We're talking about a lot of people, being impacted job-wise. Has the drivers and current mechanics and everyone who are right now in the trench of working day in and day out been asked about what their thoughts are on this kind of change? Because this is, I'm sitting here, my expertise is, I don't know how to drive, I don't drive a bus, but I feel like this kind of change of having, I don't know, what kind of engagement have you done with the drivers and the mechanics and all the people involved currently to come up with this scenario as your choice?
Yep, so thank you for the question. We have looked towards the Citizens Advisory on Transit. We went to them and got their feedback. This is a unbiased review done by the consultant. And so they look at the National Transit Database in regards to other agencies in gathering the information on cost and what our other peers are doing. And so that's looking at an unbiased view. So we have not done any interviews internally within the city, even within city staff, but looking at the data that's available.
Could you define who the peers are that you have compared this to? Are you talking about cities of our size, or are you, what is the definition of
Yeah.
compared to our peers?
Yep, so the National Transit Database is a Federal Transit Administration database that we provide information on a yearly basis. All agencies that receive federal funds are required to provide this. And so this National Transit Database is basically all transit agencies' information in there. And so you've got agencies that are big, are smaller, they only provide paratransit. So there's a lot of information in that, and that's the database that they looked at.
Okay. So you talked to the Citizens Advisory Council, but not directly talked to the drivers and gone in and did a survey or got input on these particular options. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're not seeking feedback from even our internal staffing or others. This is again, it's an unbiased review based on other agencies and what the datas are.
Okay. How would that impact their jobs that are currently working as drivers and as maintenance staff? Will this have, are they looking at, adding, you say adding 5 maintenance jobs with this, which of course would become with quite a bit of cost. But is there going to be any changes to the current schedules and different, is this going to have any huge impact to how we're doing it status quo now?
There isn't. This is not driving how we provide our services. Our services are driving how we're going to provide it. So it's not the other way around. We're looking at the ridership and how where the services are needed. So this does not impact how we're going to provide that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dennis. Thank you, Ms. Zhang. I'll go with my questions now if nobody else has any. Thank you. Pick and scroll on this piece of paper. I will do the best to decipher my writing here. Mr. Keen, you brought up control, and I think that's really, really important for what we're looking at here. However, I see scenario 4 has a much higher level of control, the highest level of control, which I like, because I think that actually protects our other asset. I hear a lot of talk about mechanical assets, but I'm not hearing assets of being our ridership, the folks that we're actually providing the service for, and then of course, the people that are providing the service. And of course, it's everyone in the transit department, but the drivers specifically are the ones that are the direct liaison with those customers. And then of course, dispatch, I would assume. So bringing in the new maintenance staff, I think is really, really great. But what portion of sorry, trying to decipher what I wrote here. What portion of cost will be those new 140 drivers versus paying TransDev to pay those drivers? How does that scenario work out? What's the cost for TransDev to be paying them and we pay TransDev, and what's the cost if we were to pay those drivers?
Well, in the comparison there, those are the operating cost. And so there are static costs that are built in there. And that's basically our cost to provide the services, no matter in what scenario it is. So if I think I'm hearing your question correctly, you're talking about driver costs versus like the cost it would be for the city to bring the drivers in-house?
Yeah, that's basically what I'm asking. I heard you say we needed to hire 140 drivers. I'm making an assumption, please correct me, that there are already 140 drivers currently with TransDev.
Yeah, so it's actually staffing. So most of it is drivers, I think 90 to 100. But then we also have to bring in like the supervisor. We'd have to dispatchers, the managers to oversee the supervisors and that operation. So there's some administrative staffing that we would be required to bring in-house or that to hire. And then also that is a large number to undertake. And what's not on here is that if we were to bring everything in-house, we'd have to have 2 full-time staff to make that transition happen. So that's another couple staffing that would be required, not to add on like the HR support that we're going to need and the IT support. So those are like staffing that's not directly like driving the vehicles that are out there.
Okay, yep, understand that. So might that take place then with the consolidation of the fleet and the staff that we would be hiring? Wouldn't they be pulled in with the consolidation of all of the other fleet that we are working on?
Correct. So that could be, that's what scenario 4 is. Some of the things that on scenario 4 is what would happen with that is if you think about it, and it's not on here, but remember that we have to implement this by the end of 2026. And if you think about all the other city initiatives or things that are happening in this next 2 years, there's a lot happening in the city of Rochester. If we wanted to go towards that, there's opportunities in the future because if we contract, the contract ends and we can always amend and do something different. But these next 2 years is going to take a lot of resources within transit, within bus rapid transit. We're trying to get ready for it. I think if we were to bring it in-house with this huge undertaking of that transition, it kind of takes away and spreads us very thin in making this transition go smoothly. Also, as I mentioned, bus rapid transit is new to us. We're trying to work on our end on like getting set up for that. How do we do the testing and the operations? And so it's just, I don't want to sound like I'm like, you know, a lot of excuses, but it is a lot in the next 2 years to transition.
Transition to going to scenario 4 with the BRT and the other
Correct.
the other
Yep, the
transportation
other projects that we have going.
projects and programs we have going. I mean, that's very understandable, but the opportunity then to perhaps, if we were to go with the staff recommendation of scenario 3, to perhaps extend a lease or a contract with TransDev and then pull in scenario 4, that is a possibility that could happen.
So the current contract ends in 2026. The initial term of that started in 2016. And so we extended for another 5 years, and that's why it's 2026. We have no more extension options. So if we were to do some kind of extension, it would be like a transition period. So we couldn't do it long term.
Got it. I understand that. Thank you for answering that. That's important as we move forward with this. So couldn't we use like a consultancy or pay somebody contracted to help with the implementation of just not only bringing in maintenance, as in scenario 3, but also bringing in drivers and the added HR and dispatch that you mentioned for scenario 4? It would be a short amount of time to get that transition handled. Then we wouldn't need to implement the staff with that added burden with BRT downtown, Unbound, and then also this shift here with the in-house operations.
Right. I mean, that is a scenario. I mean, that's the process. If we were to move forward with that, that's an option, is to hire a consultant to come in and help. And then again, hiring that consultant also takes time. So we just have to factor that in. Again, it is just the amount of staffing and the potential remodeling that we're doing over at PWOTOC. We would need to pivot really quickly if we were to bring that in-house. It's a lot of time crunch and focus that we would need to do. We would need to have another full-time person just to oversee that consultant for that transition.
Okay, and then I guess my final question is I understand this is the most expensive scenario that you've offered, but is that perhaps with this transition that's necessary to do all this, and then perhaps the cost might fall down after the initial year or two of let's pretend we go with scenario 4. The bulk of the cost is up getting that ready, the transition, the extra hiring, the added stress levels, but then the cost will eventually go down. Is that a possibility? Did you run the numbers for that?
Yes, so they did run, and Jill, as I talk, if I'm missing anything, please chime in. So in the operations cost for scenario 4, it does include some things that we are currently not paying for our software for, like the paratransit and some of those things that Transdev is currently, we'd have to bring that in-house. And so that's additional cost to us. One of the things about a contractor like Transdev is that they are national. And so they have resources that we don't have that we can lean into. So again, like microtransit, we were able to get the software to implement that quickly. If it was all in-house, we'd have to procure that, and that could take another 9 months to 12 months to do that procurement and get that system on board before we even implement the microtransit. So we're now a year out, and the funding is going to terminate. So we have to move quickly, and that's one of the things, opportunities with vendors, that they have those resources nationally that we can lean into when we need it.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions? Ms. Dennis?
Yeah, thank you. So this is just follow up. You said you needed to hire 2 additional full-time staff to have this transition if it was going full to option 4. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And what would be those full-time staff again? What would be the titles of what they would be to help transition and then stay with the city, like what Councilmember Kirkpatrick was saying, or would they be just part of the transition process and then not needed after that?
Right. So I don't know the titles. Obviously, we didn't work that level of detail,
Oh,
but it would be to transition the hiring. We don't have these current positions in the city, so we would have to evaluate, go through that whole review process, rating it. And so that's a lot of different positions that we would need. So, I mean, we need some kind of HR support. And then also just to plan out, like, we're not going to hire all 90 drivers and then just have them sit there while Transdev is still operating. You know, like we need some kind of transition, or we wouldn't hire, just like the police that is going to support BRT. We're staging it. And that was a plan to, so again, we don't want to hire 140 all on such and such a date. That plan needs to be worked out.
Oh, okay. What, I guess maybe, oh, golly, I'm sorry if I'm not following this. Wouldn't a lot of the drivers who are currently working, when they be hired? I mean, I feel like, or like I guess I just, this whole, what my recollection was, what I remember when I've talked to drivers, I think they want to be part of the city, a part of the, like, you hear about a lot of these protests happening at other organizations that, contracted workers want to be, having the benefits of the city with, all the government benefits that are offered. So I guess I think it's important to do more grassroots, connecting to what the drivers are currently needing and wanting, so that, I think some of these numbers, like 5 new maintenance staff, I mean, are we at capacity already for, I mean, what I've heard is it's not like it's not needed, to, there's plenty right now of support, and to add 5 more, I guess I think these numbers are, I mean, I understand you want to be conservative with, want to make sure that people know the highest, whatever, but if we want to go doing what's best for the city, I think having people who work for the city or people who are providing services, whatever capacity, are really involved in processes that impact their daily lives. And so I think coming back, before I could even give it a support on any of these options, I would like to know what the drivers and maintenance staff have to say about these options. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dennis. I have Mr. Keen and then Ms. Elms and Mr. Parrish. Should we go to Ms. Elms and Mr. Parrish first?
Sure.
Okay. Ms. Elms, please.
Councilmember Kirkpatrick, I just want to bring into this conversation that I think it's a real question mark whether or not the FTA and the state would actually be absorbing these cost differences. Right now, the way that your transit system is funded is only a teeny tiny bit from the tax levy, and that has been for a short period of time to get the ADA pads up and running at the bus stops. And so I don't know the answer to this, but I would be surprised if this would not be coming from your tax levy. So I just think that that's an important part of the conversation to be having. And I see someone shaking their head in the audience, but that's actually how our budget works. So I think it's really important that you be aware that if you were planning to go down this road, I would be interested in Ms. Zhang's thoughts on that, but I haven't worked in a city where the FTA and the state are willing to pay for those types of transition costs when they are not directly related to ridership.
Mr. Parrish,
That was the point.
thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to try to, I did this since I've spoke, there's been references to both the idea of like of the four options, the single, like vend everything versus vend nothing. I think the staff came in with what I thought was more of the idea of looking at a solution where we would bring some things in-house, but not as dramatic. I've heard it said that we're doing the most expensive option, which is not accurate. We're doing the one that is nominally more expensive than vending everything, with that trade-off of getting more control in-house. And I mean, from my listening to the discussion, I guess I'll just state, I do not believe there's council support to bring everything in-house. There's certainly some opinions to do that, but I don't think that's it. And I would not want to send the staff off to try to do that work because I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
Thank you, Mr. Keen. Anybody else have any comments? No? Okay, Ms. Zhang,
Can I add on to?
please.
So in regards to the funding, 80% and historically 80% are funded through state and federal funds. And it comes in various ways. State has grants for us, and then FTA has apportionments. That 20% is made up by local. And for us, Rochester Public Transit, we have made that up through our fare revenue and our advertising. And so currently our ridership is not to back in the 2019 numbers. And we are still having a shortfall on that. We were very prosperous before COVID. And so we've been leaning onto our retained earnings, and then also CARES and ARPA was able to help in that. And so we are still short in reaching that revenue. And so if we were to pursue a much higher model, we'd need to figure out how we close that gap. In talking to the state, their funds is whatever their funds are. They cannot provide any more. We are part of the Greater Minnesota 5307. And so it's, I don't want to say spread amongst us, but there's only so much in the pot. So keep that in mind. And then as we move forward, if we don't, if we do have a shortfall, I mean, we'd have to look at our service and see what we need to do, or come back here for, as mentioned, potential tax levy. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate this report. I would lean myself also towards scenario 3, but knowing that there may not be support for scenario 4, which would be my preference. I don't know if any further quick comparison could be done to scenario 3 and 4 to tighten up those numbers so that we could see what we're looking at before the November 4th. But that's where I stand with this right now. So thank you, Ms. Zhang, and the rest of the team. Appreciate it. We're going to take a short break. We will be back at 5:15, please.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Okay, thank you. I understand. That's, you're there. You're there. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you. And we are going to move to the progress update. And what's next is Link Rapid Transit update with Ms. Zhang again and Mr. Sampson Brown.
It's on. There we go. Great. Good evening, Steve Sampson Brown. Almost said project manager. That was my old job, director of construction with the city administration team. So here tonight to provide a check-in on progress that we've made over the last several months and where this project's going to be headed as we get ready to move into the construction phase. So again, just talking about touching on progress. We'll be back before you in November to talk in detail. I'll touch on that more later. Talk about the bus procurement design. We're moving through our right-of-way acquisition phase, and then we're getting ready to start bidding some work and getting under construction in 2025. So just quick overview. Again, we have 2.8 miles of Link BRT. We have 7 stations along the way. We have the 5 in the middle have platforms on either side of the road, and the West Transit Village and the downtown waterfront station just have a single platform to go with them. What the goals of the project, just touching back sustainable transportation. So in terms of mode shift, we're expecting 11,000 riders per day when Link opens up in second half of 2026. Again, the design is based on providing buses that convey performance and an elevated experience. Again, our goal is to encourage ridership, and we do that through providing comfort as part of everybody's travel experience, and then to promote infill development along the Link BRT route, also known as transit-oriented development around the country. And then we want to move people quickly. So we'll have some 5-minute ride times during peak hours, and then we'll have 10 minutes. Bus will be coming every 10 minutes during non-peak hours. So again, just some more high-level information. You've probably seen this before. Weekday service, the peak runs, bus is coming every 5 minutes, run from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Weekday service is 5 a.m. to midnight, and weekend service will be 8 a.m. to midnight. Travel time between the complete trip from east to west or west to east is about 20 minutes on one ride. Recent progress. So with me tonight is project manager Josh DeFrang. Online is project manager Ian Cochran, doing a lot of work on this project to move it ahead, keep it progressing at a good pace. Ian's been working with our local artists. We're going to have nice artwork planned for all 12 of the platforms with both local and national artists, and they have been advancing their designs. So again, trying to create that elevated experience here on the Link BRT project route. Recent accomplishments. So we've received the final readiness report delivered from the FTA. It was about a month ago. That's a major milestone in the world of EA's world. They basically said our project is ready to bid, and we've got our project well organized. They do a quality assurance, quality control process with the FTA's consultant out of Philadelphia. So major milestone there for the team to accomplish. Next steps coming up. So the final step in the grant application and finalizing the approval of the grant from the FTA side is it needs to move through TRAMS. FTA has explained to us that TRAMS shuts down here in mid-October and reopens in 2 to 4 weeks. They didn't quite explain why the variance of time frame, but we need TRAMS to open up before the final, Rochester's Link BRT grant approval can be finally approved after their financial management system reopens up at the start of the new fiscal year, for the federal fiscal year. 100% design plans have been created. Josh has been taking the lead to circulate those with all the various departments that we work with on the infrastructure side. Josh has been leading workshops with subsets of the department teams, make sure that our own internal quality control process is happening and that we're getting final comments from the city team back to our lead consultant SRF, and they're incorporating those into the final bid documents. And then we're going to be advertising our biggest package, which is civil utilities and architecture. We've moved that into one bid package. We think that the current bidding environment is right to do so. That'll also allow us to have one large general contractor leading the coordination and staging of the project along Second Street. And we think as a city construction management team, it'll be easier to collaborate with one contractor versus having potentially two contractors trying to negotiate over real estate to get each of their projects done. So we'll be back in front of you in 3 weeks on November 4th to request permission to initiate that bid package. Again, my prior job, our city manager used to talk about plan your work and work the plan. So as you can see, we've been well planned here historically. You've been around for a lot of that, and now we are executing on that plan that's been created. Our most recent milestone in terms of planning was just approval for the property acquisition phase to proceed, which happened recently. And then overall timeline of the project. So again, here we are in October of 2024. We are getting ready to advertise for construction on both the West Transit Village project and the civil utilities and architecture. Both of those will be asking you to initiate bidding in November. And then we'll have approximately 6 weeks to work with contractors while they're preparing their bids. We'll receive bids, and then we will be likely awarding after the new year and then we'll be executing a contract with a contractor in January, and then we are into the real part of the construction project, which will be getting detailed construction schedules from them, preparing our communications team to work with the contractor, providing as much advance notice to everyone that's involved along the project corridor. And then we'll be, as we get through construction in 2025, most likely due to weather, they'll take a pause over the upcoming winter, or 2 winters from now, and then restart in spring of 2026. And then we will actually have commissioning and testing of the buses running on the BRT line through the summer of 26 for start of revenue service at the end of 26. Again, recent EA's team and Mike Collins, Transit Project Manager, have been working hard on advancing the final design options for the BRT bus. So things like graphics on the exterior of the bus, seating styles, and then blending that, at least on the screen that looks black, but that flooring is actually a darker blue with some lighter speckles in it. And the text box kind of blocks the bottom of the bus, but we'll have link logos and things like that at the entrances. Again, just thinking through your complete progress in terms of being a rider on the platform, trying to get you onto the bus as efficiently as possible to help keep the bus on schedule and get you into your seats. So I touched before, we have the 3 bid packages that will make up the total of the Link BRT project. West Transit Village and the civil package will be in November. Likely from timing wise, a much smaller package. The bus maintenance bay addition will be initiating bidding on that in January. And again, just schedules, I touched on that previously. And how we're going to manage expectations during construction. So probably since I've gotten here, and this is literally 3 months, starting tomorrow, will be my 3-month anniversary, we have been talking about business forward, what that means to this project, expectations on how this project will work with affected parties, whether it's residents or businesses along the project corridor, and how are we going to layer in support and communicate clearly expectations on coordinating the project around Second Street up and down the corridor. City's brought on 2 different consultants to help us with that. Our construction management team has Zan Associates on board. Zan's job is to work with the city's internal construction management team and work directly with affected business owners along the corridor, helping city staff communicate in advance when there's planned detours, or if we need to turn off a utility service, coordinating on timing, what that timing might need to be, or how we would transition to a temporary service for momentary outage, and what's the best time for that. So they will be coordinating all those conversations with us. Josh and I and Ian were on a call this morning talking about business forward, and along the corridor, there's 300 identified businesses. So quite a bit of communication that needs to happen, and we are prepared to make sure that communication does happen. At a higher level, RAP Strategies is brought on board, more of an umbrella type conversation. So they'll be putting out general information to the public, working with our internal communications team, going back and forth between both city projects. And then if there happens to be overlapping unbound work coming from the Mayo Clinic, RAP Strategies will be correlating that information together and just putting out a clear message to all residents or visitors and downtown workers to downtown Rochester, so they can understand what's going on both on the City Link BRT project, but also possibly a block away, we might have some work going on with the Mayo Clinic. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Who would like to start us off? Mr. Wall.
Thank you. I don't believe that I have ever seen a rendition or a rendering of the southeast downtown waterfront terminus with that much larger project. Is there any immediate development that's going on around that terminus?
In terms of private development?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we hear so much about West Transit Village. What's happening on the east side?
Well, one of the things that's happening within our project management team is the 6th Street Bridge and corridor improvements. So as part of this project, there'll be basically a cul-de-sac or roundabout that'll be built as a dead end. And then as soon as the 6th Street Bridge and connecting roadway project happens, that will now be part of a through street. As part of the Link BRT project, we'll have a platform at the end of the route. It'll be more of a relatively simple platform, not a large station in contrast. And then maybe, I don't know if somebody else, Cindy or somebody, could speak to the private development.
Councilmember Wall, I can answer that. So reminder, that site is generally owned by Camagaran, and they have a contract currently to operate it as a park and ride facility. They are currently going through their general development plan process that's actually approved, their general development plan. And so the next step in that process is to go through an environmental review. And so similar to what you saw, like say Mayo go through, that sort of same environmental review needs to happen here. And so that's the next step. There isn't any immediate project on the horizon, but they're going through that entitlement process to get closer to that point.
And Councilmember, well, the only other thing that I'll add is we do since that's an endpoint, there is one station. We do have that station design. We'd be happy to share those drawings.
Okay. And I would just think that it would be much more pleasant for riders to have something there to pick up a coffee or at some point. Wouldn't make sense. Thank you.
I can appreciate your comments about that east end of the BRT in a very different economic area of our city. I continue to see more prosperous projects being done on the west side than there. And I think we're, going to see equally as much ridership happening from that location, perhaps, or maybe even further as we go out east to, like, for instance, the Heinz Center that has 750 spaces available, or, linking up that east side of our transit folks from Plainview, Chatfield, Dover, Yoda, that way. So I can appreciate that comment.
And I guess maybe one thing I can add, maybe I'm too much of a bored civil engineer, but last week I ran some numbers. So I looked up a 5-year-old Toyota Camry and AAA's website. You can do cost of vehicle ownership. And I took the annual maintenance cost and backed that into the current mortgage rates of a 30-year mortgage here in Rochester. And basically, if a family only has to own one car versus two because they live near the BRT, you can basically achieve a mortgage that will pay for an additional $100,000 of a mortgage payment. So there is value to families that normally have to drive two cars to get back and forth to work and get their family around town, being to live within a walkable distance, which general urban design standards is a 15-minute walk shed, and being able to save that money and put it towards other resources within your own family budget.
That's great data. Thank you. It's somewhat related, but it's really nice to hear that. I think that's why most of us who are living downtown choose to live downtown. We understand the benefit of that. Are there any other questions from anyone? Mr. Keen?
Yeah, just one's just real high level, but we have have all the paperwork that we've received the FTA Small Starts Grant. Have we received any payments yet, or is that when work starts, or is that in 2025?
Actually, Councilman Wall, we are expecting in December 5th, the actual Small Starts Grant paperwork to be presented to us from the grant. So we've received notification that we meet the fitness levels to receive the grant, but again, we're currently paused. I talked about the federal shutdown of their TRAMS financial software, so they cannot finalize their paperwork. They actually said they have to re-enter the Rochester project into their new system after it reopens. So that's why they've given us a deadline, or expected deadline of December 5th for us to receive that TRAMS grant notification. And
Yes.
Yeah, and if I might just build off of what Steve has said, Councilmember Keen, it is a reimbursable grant. We will have, once the paperwork once we're in the system, we have the agreement signed, as Steve indicated, December 5th. Following that, we can immediately submit a request for reimbursement for expenses that we've had up to this point. So that is our intent, but then it is a reimbursable process.
Yeah, I believe we've been fronting all of our design work, all of the work we've done to this point through the DMC funding.
And so then we would be seeking reimbursement.
Okay.
A pro rata share, right? Because there's a
Okay.
split.
But it's not like when we do platform 7, we build that and then it comes back. Is there any sort of cadence of the Small Starts dollars coming to the city for the project, or is it really reimbursement?
Reimbursement.
And we'll be processing those payments to the contractor on a monthly basis. And we've already had an initial meeting with our finance department to talk about a timely processing of when they can expect drawdowns to both pay the contractor and then make sure we're well organized as a city staff to be able to quickly turn around and receive reimbursement from the FTA and have our paperwork ready to do so.
Thank you. As far as business forward, I think we got good, I don't know, I hate to say publicity, but a good response from the business public doing the heart of the city. Although I also heard it probably was a 10% increase on our costs and probably having schedule impacts. Are we expecting similar, less so in when you say we're applying business forward to bus rapid transit?
So one of the tools in the Business Forward toolkit is micro phasing, which can draw the project out. It's my opinion that we really need to get the contractor on board because while we have general areas where they're going to work at different times, they have some flexibility. We don't know if they're going to bring 40 people to the job site or 50. So one of the things I think we need to balance as we start ramping up our communications and listening to our business sector storefront community is, would they prefer for the contractor to have a more disruptive operation but a shorter term, or a slightly disruptive operation that's still disruptive and they're there for perhaps a couple of weeks with no specific area in mind? So I think we need to test that with our business owners and figure out what they prefer. And then Josh and I and our construction management team will start to work with the contractor to figure out what is the cost of doing so. And we'll have to, and even though it's all Second Street, each location kind of varies as to what's happening in front, who needs access. Are they more of a nighttime business? Are they more of a weekend business? So I think all those factors will come into final decisions and adjustments to the project schedule to try and make it as palatable a process as possible for our business community.
Okay, that actually sounds better than I think of it. You're making it sound more like Business Forward is much more of a pre-planning thing. To me, it's a responsive thing when things are going on, and
Right.
therefore it is a schedule risk.
Right, and I think Josh has done a good job working with our consulting team to put those expectations on access in the bid plan. So we're not gonna get halfway into the project and decide, oh, we need more temporary sidewalk. We're setting a very strong standard, performance standard for what access looks like, who's gonna be available to communicate to the businesses and to the city's construction management team. And we've recently decided we're gonna have the city's construction management team really as the liaison to businesses. So we will know when they have a problem and aren't liking something, and we can track with the contractor to make sure the issue is getting resolved. My experience on other projects is that sometimes the contractor receives feedback and they have to balance, do I slow down? Or do I just get the work done more affordably for me? And they default to what makes them a more affordable process. So with city staff directly involved, we can keep a pulse on how things are going and hear directly back from the affected businesses or perhaps residential units if they're not liking what's going on, and we're prepared to make adjustments as necessary.
Okay, thank you. Let's come to a couple comments on the East Transit Village. It's not a village right now, it's surface parking. And that's what it's going to be when this starts out, and then there's neighbors there was a walking shed that's pretty large there too, good to hear. But I am kind of interested, and this is not part of BRT as we have it right now, it's defined, but when you start talking about there's going to be a general development plan in that area at some point, and then these parking permits they have are going to start running out in the not so distant future. Is there like any sort of forward thinking yet that said there's a ramp at that property at some day, or there's not a ramp at that property ever because we're doing something else? Is there any thought going into that yet?
I can jump in on that one. Couple things. There's thought on it, but it is a distant future conversation. Keep in mind, Mayo shows a ramp there on their 5-year plan.
Okay.
They list that as a future project. I don't think there's any funding or anything associated with it. I believe that's a column in the 5-year plan and it's not checked. So just note that. But then also I would note that in the small area plan, we actually show 3 smaller ramps on that site to support the commercial uses that could be there, rather than each use having surface parking lot, having more of a consolidated parking strategy. So that's something that I've been talking at length with the property management group to try to help them see the benefit in that strategy instead of surface parking. So yes, but a lot to unpack there before we get there.
Yeah, and I'll keep that clearly as after what our update is today. This is not about that
Right.
today, but again, I thought it was just good to touch on it. I'm glad to see kind of an upbeat view of this, that we do have like our in focus now, but to me, this is one of the biggest the biggest project going on in 2025, and to keep progress on it so that we are able to execute on this in 2026. So thanks for the update today.
Thank you, Mr. Keen. I do have a couple of questions. Oh, Mr. Palmer, go ahead.
I'm gonna go off of what Mr. Keen was talking about with the business forward plans. When we did North Broadway, which at that time was the second largest project Public Works ever did, they did work with 110 different businesses. What you just had said is that you as a staff are going to take this project on and be the go-between. That's a cost to that. So does that cost then get put onto the BRT program? Are they paying for you as an employee to do that?
Not directly. Our project management staff is funded through DMC dollars, and DMC is part of the local contribution on the project. So I guess depending on your perspective, does a DMC dollar pay a City of Rochester employee salary, or does a DMC dollar pay a consultant on the project side? It's part of, I guess, the project budget. And also, I do want to be clear. So while Josh will be involved, he does not have time, nor is it his highest and best use of his time to be knocking on 300 doors, but he'll be on the project site every day, looking around, making sure things are in place that should be. We also have our consultant team that is paid for through the Link BRT project as construction managers, and their marketing team, Zan Associates, will also be working with Josh primarily to communicate back and forth, both receive feedback and push information out in as much advance notice as possible.
So one of the things that I learned at North Broadway was that when it first came, it was bid high, and we had to redo our bid on it. So what we did was take a lot of constraints away. So we ended up closing the whole entire road instead of just doing parcels on that. I think that to me is a forewarning for me is to watch, if it does come in high, then what is their alternative to doing that? And that was, in hindsight, not a very good decision on the city's part that we did on North Broadway, but it was more of a learning experience. So I'd be very cautious what we do there, that when you come to us with a bid, that it has what we need to have in it, to build this for the businesses.
Agreed. And one of the things the construction management team's been talking about for 2 weeks in key areas that are more disruptive, evaluating the use of an incentive structure. So it's with 30+ years of construction experience, you can apply liquidated damages, which is a penalty of the project. And I've literally had large general contractors say, we knew we were going to be 30 days late. Whatever your liquidated damages were, we just included them in our bid price. So to pay them, and on the opposite, I have seen incentive clause work. So if it costs a contractor $5,000 a day to bring on a second crew to speed up, if you give them an incentive that will at least cover that and leave a little bit of profit, then they actually have a financial motive to speed the project work up, which gets them in and out of these key areas that are more disruptive than some of the other parts of the project. So we're going to evaluate that, and that'll be part of the November 4th, once we make a final decision on a recommendation to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Great presentation, Mr. Brown. I do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
What is the current daily ridership sort of coming off of those routes from where the West Transit Village is? I hear repeatedly 11,000 riders on the first day. What do we got now, knowing that we're less than pre-pandemic ridership?
And specific transit, I'm going to let you take that question.
Thank you.
So the ridership was projected, includes the current, keep in mind that the Mayo shuttle is going to be removed, and so there's ridership from that. We do have a ridership from different areas. There are 2 routes where we're going to be capturing some. That's a very small ridership amount, but that's is included in there. We also have the East End, as we talked about. There's ridership coming from there, and then also visitors and patients. And so there is a projection of the ridership. If you project it out, it is why our services are the 5-minute intervals and the 10-minute intervals.
Okay, thank you. Can you just maybe illustrate for us another project that we might remember that's impacted such a major thoroughfare through a large part of the city that's like this?
In my tenure of 3 months, I'm not sure I was here to experience that. Maybe Tyler has a few in mind. I'm wondering if North Broadway might have some parallels.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think North Broadway probably is the most applicable example, at least in recent history. Like Councilmember Palmer said, we learned some lessons there with the business forward strategy that was applied and how we phased that project. We'll be applying those lessons to the Link project as well, and hopefully get through it with as little disruption as possible.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. And then the last question I had on your Gantt chart, I saw that ridership would begin in May and then revenue service would start in September. Can you please define revenue service? I thought this was a fare free route.
Revenue service in terms of actual so the May date is commissioning and testing.
Okay.
So there's obviously a lot of electronics involved. We're going to be letting people know your bus is 2 minutes out. So that will be the commissioning and testing. We're going to be running buses through the complete route to make sure if they stay on schedule. So that's the biggest thing. And then revenue service, maybe has the FTA definition of it, but it basically means we're open for business. Come jump on the Link BRT and get your ride to work or wherever you might be going.
It's a terminology that we're open for service. So we're not collecting fare, but it is a common term that is used for bus rapid transit or anything that it's like when we open.
Got it. Thank you. I assumed it was a term of art, but I just wanted to make sure that the folks who are listening or reviewing this video later on would know that there really won't be any revenue
Right.
generated from ridership. So-
Technically be no revenue service.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. All right, that's it. I appreciate your work on this and thank you to the team. And we will go to the Ms. Dennis, I'm sorry.
All right. Okay. So I didn't know how to formulate this question because I don't necessarily have the data right in front of me. So I'm thinking, I know maybe some of my colleagues have read this too, but they've been looking at disruptions between when you're talking every 5 minutes, the routes going back and forth. Other bus routes or other the parking lots and different, like having disruption from blocking different people being able to get out of the parking lot. And I don't have all of this right. I'm sorry. I should have brought, there's some citizens doing some work at looking at potential problems. So are you familiar with this, this issue where people are concerned with the quickness of the buses coming, having safety implications or blocking or, bottlenecking different services that are currently?
I guess I had not heard of that yet as being raised as a concern. I can speak through a couple things. So certainly commissioning and testing, that's our multi-month timing to make sure buses are making it through. I'm not sure when if it's cross traffic that's blocking a signal, that's obviously going to stop a bus. Our bus technology will have advanced traffic signals, so it'll be able to extend the green time by up to 7 seconds, which will help keep the bus on schedule. That doesn't mean the bus speeds up. It just means it keeps moving. The BRT will run on a red painted dedicated pavement lane. So there should not be other vehicles in its way. So it's not getting backed up at an intersection signal. So there's some layers in place to keep the buses on schedule, but I'm not sure if that answered all your question.
Well, I apologize. I should have read this paperwork that was brought to me before I came to this meeting to have the exact questions. But I feel there's a lot of, I don't know, kinks that will have to be worked out when it starts up. I know I have a child in driver's ed, right? You're talking about people getting familiarized with that red lane or visitors come. I see a lot of not a lot, but over the last 17 years I've lived here, I've seen people go down one way is the wrong way just because it's confusing. If you're in a stressful time, you're a patient or a visitor, and you're trying to find how to get to your appointments or your places, and having this bus going back and forth real quick, lines, bus, and we have bike lanes, and there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to people navigating. So I guess I'll have to come back and ask more questions about like the parking ramps and just making sure that there's access and that the bus doesn't disrupt this people getting to where they need to go that necessarily can't use the link system because they're from out of state and they have their vehicle. There's different dynamics where they have to get places for mobility things. So okay, that was my
Okay,
other
so
question.
Ms. Steinhauser has
If
I
you'd
might,
like to mention.
yeah, thank you. If I might just,
Thank
add, I
you.
think that's what's important to understand is that's why the commissioning piece is so important, right? That's that 6-month window where we're understanding the system, we're testing the system, we're understanding how it's operating and making adjustments accordingly. But that is exactly one of the outcomes of the commissioning process is to understand how the system is operating, where they're not anticipating bottlenecks, but where there might be bottlenecks under a normal operation, not under a heavy construction zone. But that's exactly what commissioning is intended to do.
And I'd also add that, I talked earlier about the RAP strategies, which is the broader umbrella of communication out to the public. So I agree. It probably won't be easy. I'm a bicyclist and I still see cars parked in the bike lane when I'm out riding the streets at night. So it's a challenge. I'd almost say, if we think back 10 years ago, roundabouts were somewhat new in the country and people now are generally not driving the wrong direction on roundabouts most of the days. So, and Link BRT systems, while they're not everywhere, there's more than 3 cities in the country that have a Link BRT system now. So they're starting to become more popular on a national basis. So I think there will be an education piece definitely towards the spring of 2026. We're going to be rolling out, and whether that's signage on site, whether that's social media, whether it's community tours, we're out talking to folks in various nonprofit organizations, or where people gather to try and educate them on how to do that. Even going to road trips to high schools, right? That's a good point. How are we teaching teen drivers what a red painted lane is? Not everybody understands that, but that's just more to come, but that's probably going to start heavy in the spring of 2026, which should give us 6 months to communicate to as wide of audience as possible.
Okay, thank you. And then a lot of my questions over the last few years, I've had a lot of questions, like if someone just rides rapid transit 24/7 because they're, or not 24/7, but like, like how do you monitor how many people get on and off, and if, how long people ride, if they're riding it just for other reasons. And then I've asked those kind of questions, and I'm not going to go, but my big concern with residents in Ward 6, especially the northern area of Ward 6, it's over 15 minutes to get from Ward 6 to downtown. So just want to make sure, just as things go, that there's adequate parking so that people wanted to drive to from, Ward 6 or, anywhere, Ward 3 up, they could come down and park for free somewhere, so then they can ride the transit. So it truly would be a fare free system for everyone in the city, not just those who happen to be right around the downtown area. So just keep in mind, if that's possible, to make sure that there's accessible parking. I know there's enough parking, accessible parking, a parent with several kids and their dog or wanting to go to the park, or if there's a, wheelchair accessibility, to have people from all over to have free parking so that it is truly a fare free system. Because right now I'm still thinking people are going to have to drive down, find parking, hourly parking to ride the fare free parking, which negates the whole point.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dennis. Thank you, Mr. Brown. We appreciate the presentation. Thank you to the team. And we are going to Administrator Zelm's study session schedule, please.
Thank you, Council President. I'll just call you Council President Kirkpatrick. I did want to just quickly remind folks that your next study session is on November 13th. That is a Wednesday because the 11th is Veterans Day. So it's a holiday that is recognized. So that will be a Wednesday action plan update. So you will be hearing from our management analyst, Jessica Schuler, again, talking through 2 a.m. liquor licenses. So that came up earlier this year. And then an update on public safety aid. That was that one-time funding that you had talked about earlier in the year. And we have some updates to that and some additional recommendations that we wanted to get feedback on. So that will be on November 13th, a Wednesday. That's it.
Okay, thanks, everybody. We are going to adjourn the meeting and move to Mr. Spindler Craig, who wants to say something.
Thank you, Madam President. The closed session that we are adjourning into today does not require a formal motion, but before I invite you to adjourn into closed, I need to state a few things on the record. The reason we are moving into closed session consistent with your published agenda. The closed session is pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.05, subdivision 3C3, to consider the purchase price of properties identified as, and I won't repeat the PIN numbers, but the 4 properties are Seneca Foods Corporation, Rochester West Campus LLC, Richard E. Badger, Trustee, and 75th AZ LLC. You can adjourn to City Hall Room 104 at the time you state.
We will meet at 6:05 p.m. Does that sound fine to everybody? 6 o'clock? 6 o'clock it is. Thank you for the feedback. Meeting is adjourned.